In a quiet village, surrounded by golden fields and the gentle hum of morning life, there lived a man who owned very little, yet gave more than most. His name was Moan. He wasn't a monk, a scholar, or a great leader. He didn't speak of philosophy, nor did he ever stand upon a platform to preach, but his life itself was a silent teaching. Each day, before the first light touched the rooftops, Moan would rise, not because he had much to gain, but because he felt he had something to offer. He would step into the world with calloused hands, a calm smile, and a heart always ready to serve. A crust of bread, half a jug of water, a few kind words, whatever he had, he shared. Now, one may ask, why give when you have so little? Why offer your last coin, your final meal, or your only moment of rest? And here, dear listener, begins the essence of Dharma. The Buddha once said, "A generous heart, even when empty of possessions, is the richest of all, because in giving we do not lose. We expand, we soften the edges of our ego, we loosen the knots of fear, and we find a kind of freedom that no wealth can buy." Moan's story, which we are about to enter, is not about dramatic miracles or grand battles. It is about something quieter, something real. The ripple of goodness that begins not in temples or texts, but in the daily choices of a kind soul. It is a story of how giving without fear, without need for return, can shape not only the lives around us, but our very destiny. So take a breath, let the world slow down, and step with me into this simple, sacred tale, because in the quiet generosity of one man, we may just rediscover the forgotten power within ourselves. Every morning in the village, before the birds had finished their first song, Moan's day had already begun. His home was humble. Mud walls, a thatched roof, and a single wooden bench worn smooth by years of quiet living. But it was filled with the soft warmth of laughter, the rustle of his children's small feet, and the scent of tea steeped in love by his wife Sunita. Moan did not wake with complaints or groans, though his body ached like any man who labors under the sun. Instead, he greeted the day with quiet gratitude. Before the sun touched the earth, he was already out, carrying his tools on one shoulder and his intentions on the other. Intentions not to conquer the world, but simply to serve it. He worked as a laborer in the fields, digging, planting, harvesting, accepting whatever work was offered with a gentle nod and a ready smile. He never compared his load to another's, never measured his worth in coin or title. His joy was not in what he gained, but in what he gave. If a stray dog limped into the shade beside the field, Moan would tear his bread in half and place it gently on the ground. If an old man paused near the road, wiping his brow, Moan would offer the last of his water. And if a widow walked slowly past, holding sorrow in her eyes, Moan would slip a few coins into her hand. No words, no gestures, only kindness. To some in the village, this seemed foolish. "You have little," they would say. "Why give more?" But Moan didn't see it that way. In his heart, giving wasn't a strategy. It wasn't even a decision. It was just how he moved through the world, as naturally as the river flows to the sea. And though the world called it poverty, Moan never felt poor, because every time he saw a child smile from a shared sweet, or a traveler rest beneath a tree he had cleared of thorns, his heart felt full. His life was not built on plans or promises. It was built on presence, on noticing the needs of others, on small gestures that required no wealth, only willingness. And that, dear listener, is what made Moan rich in the truest sense. Not in gold, but in the quiet treasure of a life lived for others. Such is a day in the life of Moan. Simple, unnoticed by many, but radiant in its simplicity, a walking prayer. A reminder that compassion, when practiced daily, becomes more powerful than any sermon ever spoken. But as the days passed and the skies turned dry, even the kindest hearts begin to feel the weight of life's burden. Moan's spirit remained steady, but his home, his wife, his children began to feel the cracks of worry grow deeper. Sunita, his devoted wife, had long stood beside him. She admired his compassion, the way he saw light in everyone. But when the shelves of their small kitchen grew bare, and the children's bellies grumbled through the night, a shadow began to form in her gaze. She did not speak against Moan at first. Instead, she folded her fears into silence, mixing them with flour and prayer as she kneaded the morning bread. Yet fear has a way of seeping into even the warmest homes. Each act of Moan's generosity, giving away the last mango, the final cup of milk, was like a thread pulling at the fabric of their survival. And though Sunita loved him deeply, she could not keep the questions from rising. One evening, as the light dimmed and their children ate only rice soaked in salted water, Sunita spoke softly. "Moan, I understand your heart, but what will our children eat tomorrow if we give all that we have today?" Her voice did not carry anger, only fatigue, a weariness shaped not from selfishness, but from a mother's instinct to protect. Moan listened, quietly. His calloused hands rested in his lap, and his eyes, though gentle, held a flicker of something unfamiliar. Doubt. Was he doing the right thing? For the first time in many seasons, he questioned the path he had always walked so surely. He began to wonder, is goodness still goodness if it comes at the cost of those you love most? That night, Moan lay awake under a roof of dried leaves, listening to the breath of his sleeping family. He did not regret his kindness, but he feared that perhaps, in saving others, he had been slowly failing those closest to him. This is the seed of doubt, dear listener. It grows not from evil, but from love and fear interwoven. And yet even such doubts have their place. For often, before the bamboo strengthens, it must bend. And before a heart truly understands compassion, it must first be broken open. The struggle of Moan's family was not a sign of failure, but a sign of life, of learning, of deepening. Just as roots grow silently beneath the soil before the tree bears fruits, so too was something quietly beginning within the soul of this simple man. There comes a moment in every life when the weight of the world presses too heavily on the heart, and for Moan, that moment arrived not with thunder, but with the quiet sound of a door closing. The days had grown harder. The land, once generous, now yielded little. The sun scorched the crops, and the market prices rose like waves Moan could no longer swim against. And still he gave his time, his food, his smile. But his family, hungry and growing thinner, no longer smiled as easily. Sunita, watching her children scrape the bottom of a clay pot for the last grains of rice, finally broke her silence. Her voice trembled not with rage, but with heartbreak. "Moan," she said, "when you give away the bread, who will feed your own? When you warm the hands of strangers, who will hold ours?" Her words were not cruel. They were soaked in the fear every mother knows, the fear that love alone is not enough to protect the ones she holds dear. She was not asking for gold or comfort, only certainty, only food on the table, only the promise of tomorrow. Moan looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness deeper than words. He had always believed that kindness made the world softer, but now his wife's sorrow cut through him like a winter wind. For the first time, he questioned, was his giving still noble, or had it become a burden to those he loved most? That evening, after a long day of labor and yet another act of selflessness, giving his last coin to an old beggar, he returned home to silence. No warm tea, no soft laughter. Just the stillness of a heart waiting to be heard. And then it came. Sunita's voice, breaking. "Are we not also your responsibility, Moan? Or have we become invisible in your kindness to the world?" It was not a fight, it was a plea. Love and survival stood across from each other like two ancient rivers, each flowing strong, each claiming truth. Moan, torn between his nature and his duty, felt a crack in his soul. For what is a man to do when doing good means letting his own suffer? He sat outside that night beneath the stars, his hands clasped, not in prayer but in silence. The sky above offered no answers, only the eternal quiet of the universe. And yet, within that silence, something stirred, not doubt this time, but understanding. Perhaps love and survival were not enemies. Perhaps they were two wings of the same bird. But until now, he had been trying to fly with only one. Moan didn't have the answers yet. But in that still moment he knew, true compassion must also begin at home. And perhaps, just perhaps, the universe was waiting for this very moment, to test not just the strength of his generosity, but the wisdom of his heart. Just before the first light crept over the hills, when the world still rested under a soft veil of night, a gentle knock echoed on the wooden door of Moan's humble home. It was not loud, not urgent, just a quiet presence, as if the morning itself had decided to arrive in human form. Moan opened the door slowly, still half drowsy, expecting perhaps a neighbor in need. But standing before him was a stranger, an old man, with silver hair tangled by the wind, robes covered in dust from distant roads, and eyes so calm they seemed to carry the silence of mountains. "Good man," the elder spoke, his voice like warm water, "I have traveled far, and my body grows weary. Might you spare some food or water for an old soul?" Moan's breath caught in his chest. In the small clay bowl in the kitchen sat 2 rotis, flatbreads his wife Sunita had saved for the children's breakfast. Nothing else remained in the house. The rest had been shared, offered, or simply vanished with the long weeks of hardship. He turned his head gently toward the kitchen, where Sunita stood still, her face pale with worry. She knew. He knew. This was not just a knock on the door. It was a knock upon the heart, a test of the very faith that had guided Moan all his life. Sunita's eyes met his. They didn't argue. They didn't cry. But in that gaze was 1,000 unsaid words. Hunger, fear, fatigue, and the tender ache of a mother who had given all she could. Moan stepped back, bowed softly to the old man, and without speaking, walked to the kitchen. He picked up the rotis, still warm from the hearth, and placed them carefully in a banana leaf. Sunita's hand trembled as she reached toward him, but he gently touched her wrist. No defiance, no pride, just a soft assurance that this was who he was and who he would always be. He returned to the door and offered the food with both hands, his head bowed low, not in shame, but in reverence. The old man took the bread with grace, saying only, "Few give when they have little. Fewer still do so without bitterness. You, kind soul, have given with both hands and a pure heart. That is the rarest offering of all." Then he sat quietly on the wooden bench beside the door, eating slowly, as though tasting not just food, but a story woven into each bite. And as the first light of dawn spilled across the sky, something stirred in the air, something ancient and quiet. Moan watched the old man eat, unaware that his act had not gone unnoticed by the unseen forces of the universe. What he had done was not just kindness, it was surrender. It was the faith that gives, not when it is easy, but when it costs the most. And in the stillness of that morning, as the birds began to sing and the world awoke once more, Moan didn't feel empty. He felt light, as if he had passed through a fire and found something untouched at the center, his unshakable, unbreakable self. The old man ate in silence, each bite slow and deliberate, as if the bread were more than nourishment, perhaps memory, perhaps blessing. Moan remained still beside the door, not seeking praise, not waiting for reward. To him, this moment was simply another chapter in the book of living with compassion. And yet, something in the air felt different, as if the morning was holding its breath. When the last bite had been swallowed, the elder set his hands upon his knees and looked up at Moan. His eyes held a depth that spoke of lifetimes, weathered by suffering, softened by wisdom. "You have done something today that many in this world would not," he said gently. "You gave not from abundance, but from lack. And that," he added, "is where true wealth begins." Moan lowered his gaze in humility. He did not think himself special, only someone trying to do what felt right, even when it was hard. The old man slowly reached into the folds of his robe. From a hidden pouch, wrapped in worn blue cloth, he drew out something with great care. It was small, yet surprisingly heavy. He held it in both hands and offered it to Moan. "This," he said, "was once a gift to a king. But kings have many treasures and rarely know the value of one. I have carried it for years, waiting for the day it would find a worthy home." Moan took the bundle with quiet curiosity. Gently, he unfolded the cloth, and there, catching the soft rays of morning light, was a golden bowl, smooth and radiant, but not flashy. Its surface was etched with delicate, ancient patterns, as if telling a story no one remembered, except the earth, the sky, and now, Moan. His breath caught, not because of the gold, but because of the feeling that came with it, a stillness, a reverence. He could sense that this object had passed through many hands, had listened to many prayers, and now it sat in his palms, shining without pride. Sunita, watching from behind the doorway, dropped the cloth she had been holding. Her eyes widened, but there was no greed in her gaze, only awe. Something within her shifted. She saw not just a golden bowl, but a silent affirmation that all the giving, all the doubt, all the struggle, they had not been for nothing. The old man smiled. "This bowl," he said, is not just gold. It holds the echo of every act of compassion it has witnessed. It is not yours because you are rich. It is yours because you are rich in spirit. Tears welled in Moan's eyes, though he said nothing. He only bowed his head once more, holding the bowl like a sacred truth placed in his care. In that quiet exchange, something invisible was set in motion. A gift had been given. Not wealth, not status, but confirmation that even in a world that often forgets kindness, the universe remembers. Always. The golden bowl rested quietly in a corner of Moan's small home. It did not sit upon a pedestal. It was not locked away. It was simply there, humble, radiant, like a sunbeam caught in stillness. But its presence, though silent, began to speak louder than any voice in the village. Word of the mysterious visitor and the golden gift spread like morning mist, warmed by the sun. Curious neighbors came, not out of envy, but with a gentle wonder. They came not to touch the bowl, but to witness the heart that had received it. And that heart, Moan's heart, had not changed. He still rose before dawn, hands deep in the soil, sweat clinging to his brow. He still gave water to passing strangers. He still broke his bread in half, even when the pantry was light. But now, something was different. Not in what he gave, but in how the village received it. For years, Moan's kindness had been a quiet wind brushing unnoticed through dry fields. Now it was a breeze that stirred the branches in other hearts. One by one, others began to change. A shopkeeper who once turned away beggars now kept a jar of coins beside his register. A young woman who rarely spoke to her elderly neighbor began bringing her warm soup on cold evenings. Even the children, wide-eyed and full of questions, started leaving crumbs near the fences for birds and strays. Sunita, who had once wept alone in the kitchen, now prepared more food than the family needed, not out of obligation, but out of joy. Her hands moved with a grace born not from duty, but from awakening. She had seen what faith looked like when tested, and she had seen the beauty of it blooming, not in wealth, but in peace. The village was not suddenly rich. The roads were still dusty. The roofs still leaked when it rained. But the spirit of the place had shifted. A gentleness had returned to people's faces. A new rhythm had begun to play, one of giving, sharing, remembering. And in this transformation, no one shouted sermons. No one held up signs. It was not a festival, nor a decree. It was a quiet revolution born from one man's consistent, compassionate way of living. Sometimes, true change doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes like a seed, watered by daily acts of love, breaking through the soil when the time is right. And in that little village, where wheat fields met the sky, something sacred had begun to grow. While the golden bowl shimmered quietly in Moan's home, its true weight was not in the metal, it was in the message. For those who saw clearly, it wasn't about treasure or reward. It was a mirror, reflecting a deeper truth that many spend a lifetime searching for, that real wealth is not what we keep, but what we give. Generosity, you see, is not measured in coins or possessions. It is measured in the willingness of the heart to open, even when it is tired, to give, even when one has little, to believe, even when the world seems cold. Moan's gift was not simply food or shelter. It was the warmth of presence, the kindness of attention, the silent message that said, "You are not alone." In this life, we are often taught to accumulate, to gather, to store, to protect what is ours. But what if instead we saw life as a flowing river, not a stagnant pond? The river gives, it never holds back, and yet it is always full. Moan, in his quiet way, lived like that river. He gave, not because he had much, but because he understood that love multiplies only when it moves. And here lies a secret many overlook. The act of giving is not a loss. It is an expansion. When we give with a pure heart, we grow, not in size, not in status, but in spirit. We become larger than our fears, greater than our doubts. We begin to live beyond the limits of the self. Moan never gave expecting return. He gave because it felt right, because it aligned with something ancient and true. That is why the universe responded, not with a reward, but with a reminder. The golden bowl was not the prize. The prize was already within him, a generous heart, a faithful spirit, and a life that touched others without asking for applause. True wealth, dear listener, is invisible to the eye but felt by every soul it touches. It is the light we leave behind in other people's lives. And perhaps, when we depart from this world, it will not be what we owned that defines us, but how much we loved, how often we gave, and how deeply we cared. As the years passed, the golden bowl rested quietly in the corner of Moan's modest home, its glow softened by time and touch. But its true brilliance was not in how it shone, it was in what it sparked. Moan's life had become more than a story. It had become a seed, gently planted in the hearts of all who knew him. The children who once watched their father give away their last piece of bread grew up with a different understanding of the world. They learned that giving is not weakness, but strength, that a kind hand held out in silence can be louder than 1,000 speeches. They saw that their father, though never rich in possessions, had become one of the wealthiest men in spirit. His presence had a calmness like a tree that has stood through every season, not untouched, but unshaken. Neighbors began to change too, quietly at first. A loaf of bread left on a doorstep, a mended fence for an elderly couple, a pot of soup shared with someone who had none. These were not grand gestures, but small ripples from a life lived with purpose. Moan never preached, never asked anyone to follow his path, but hearts are like soil. When one flower blooms with enough beauty, others begin to grow. And Sunita, once torn between fear and faith, now stood beside her husband not as a cautious partner, but as a co-guardian of their shared legacy. She found joy in preparing one extra meal, not with worry, but with warmth. Her hands no longer trembled from uncertainty, they moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen love survive the storm. Moan's legacy was not carved in stone. It was etched gently into the way people spoke to one another, how they listened, how they chose compassion, when judgment would have been easier. It was not about how much he gave, but how deeply he lived. For in the end, a meaningful life is not about fame, fortune, or fanfare. It is about the footprints we leave, not on the ground, but in the hearts of others. And Moan, in his quiet, giving way, had become immortal, not through monuments, but through love. Dear listener, as the tale of Moan gently draws to a close, let us pause, not to end the story, but to let it bloom within us. For stories like these are not meant to be simply heard. They are meant to awaken something long asleep in the heart. You see, Moan was not a hero in the way the world often defines one. He did not conquer kingdoms, nor build great monuments. His name was not sung by bards, nor carved in marble. But he lived a life that mattered, not just for himself, but for everyone who came near his light. And the truth is, you can too. You do not need gold to be generous. You do not need abundance to begin giving. You only need a heart that sees beyond itself. A heart willing to offer even the smallest act of kindness, simply because it is right. A kind word to someone who is breaking. A warm bowl of rice shared with someone who has none. A moment of patience when frustration wants to rise. In the teachings of the Buddha, we learn that dana, generosity, is the first of the 10 perfections. It is not about the amount, but the intention. A spoonful of water given with sincerity is greater than a chest of treasure given with pride. Why? Because true giving purifies the giver. It loosens the knot of ego. It expands the heart. And in that expansion, suffering begins to dissolve. Moan did not wait for a perfect moment to give. He gave in hunger. He gave in uncertainty. He gave when it cost him comfort. And in doing so, he opened the door for something divine to enter. That is the hidden magic of generosity. It does not reduce you. It reveals your true nature. So perhaps the question is not, what can I give? But what is holding me back from giving? Is it fear, scarcity, the belief that your offering is too small to matter? Let this story be your gentle teacher. Let Moan's life remind you that every act of kindness, no matter how unnoticed, leaves a trace in this world, like petals falling from a flower, one by one, sweetening the path for others. And if ever you wonder whether it's worth it, remember this. No river knows how far it will flow, it just flows. No candle knows how many it will light, it just burns. And no kind heart knows whose life it will change, it just loves. So go forth, dear one, give not because the world is watching, but because your soul is awake. Give, even if all you can offer today is a smile, a moment, a breath of peace. For in that giving, you are not losing. You are returning home to the deepest truth, that in love, in kindness, in generosity, we are never poor. May your journey be gentle. May your hands stay open. And may the story of Moan remind you that even in a world of noise, a quiet act of giving still echoes to the heavens.